The UN Human Rights Office has condemned Israeli military action in the Gaza Strip. In a report issued on Tuesday, it said dozens of Palestinians have been killed or injured in recent days. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency and witnesses say Israeli strikes killed 12 people, including a family of 6 in the Palestinian territory on Tuesday alone. Despite a fragile ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas, violence in the Gaza Strip has not stopped, and efforts to secure a lasting agreement to end the war have stalled. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency said one Israeli airstrike hit a house in central Gaza City on Tuesday. Witnesses said 6 members of the Al-Masri family, including 4 children, were killed. The Israeli military confirmed the strike, saying its target was a Hamas militant and that it's still looking into the results of the attack. A brother of the man killed in the strike said he'd been asleep in the next room when the house was hit. He described hearing the children calling for help as the fire spread.
We were sleeping like everyone else when we were surprised by this treacherous attack. The fire spread quickly through the house. Sadly, my brother's family was completely erased. Him, his wife and their 4 children died. I was in the room next to them. You hear the sound of children calling out, "Uncle, uncle," and you can't do anything.
Palestinian authorities say that 1,100 people have been killed in Israeli attacks since October, when a ceasefire was announced. The UN Human Rights Office has independently verified 685 of those deaths, including 283 women and children. And they say the verification of additional cases is ongoing.
The killing of civilians in these attacks raises concerns of continuing violations of international humanitarian law, war crimes, and other possible atrocity crimes in Gaza. Under international humanitarian law, deliberately attacking civilians is a war crime.
Hiba Alhejazi is Director for Advocacy for the occupied Palestinian territories at the NGO Save the Children. Welcome to DW. What have your staff and partner organisations, what have you seen following these latest attacks in Gaza?
What we've seen is basically the so-called ceasefire is only a ceasefire in name. Unfortunately, the conditions on the ground haven't improved considerably, and children are still being killed nearly daily. In July, we marked around 19 children killed across the occupied Palestinian territories. 18 of these were inside of Gaza. And so, as you can see, we're just seeing conditions continue to deteriorate.
What sort of support is available for children who have lost parents, relatives, or indeed their homes?
So what is available to those children is very, very limited. Organizations like SAVE and other humanitarian organizations, we try and provide some semblance of support, psychological support for these children, cash assistance where needed. But when you're speaking about Gaza, which is a hellscape that's been disseminated by military aggression and a lack of infrastructure and a lack of services, there's only so much that can be basically done. So these kids, though they do receive some sort of support, it's nowhere near what is actually needed to help them so basically not just survive Gaza, but be able to grow and thrive.
And what sort of numbers are we talking about? This is the ceasefire that you talked about there. That was signed in October. You described Gaza as still a hellscape. In the time since this ceasefire deal was signed, how many Palestinian children have been killed?
So over 260 Palestinian children have been killed inside of Gaza since the so-called ceasefire agreement came into effect in October 2025.
And how confident can you be in those figures when access to the territory is so restricted and independent verification so difficult?
We're very confident of those figures. These figures are cross-corroborated across multiple different sources. So there's the Ministry of Health, there's also independent investigations, and similarly as well, you have the UN body, which is able to provide also some semblance of corroboration. And similarly, news organizations like yourself and others also daily report these different airstrikes and these different killings. And that's where we basically draw our statistics from.
And the Israeli justification for killing these civilians is often that they are a sad consequence of conducting what the Israelis say are precision strikes in the hunt for what they say are terrorists. Do the circumstances of the deaths that your colleagues have seen and described, Do those circumstances bear out that Israeli story?
No, and collateral damage, the amount that we've seen of children dying inside of Gaza Strip cannot basically be justified in any way. You're speaking since October 2023, basically a figure of 21,200 children who've been killed inside of Gaza. Now, I can't see any kind of circumstances where you could basically allocate the word precision to that when you've had such a high death toll of children killed. And that doesn't even begin to basically capture the children who've been maimed, who've lost family members, who've been injured, who've had basically their legs amputated and arms amputated. So the damage, it goes far beyond just the ones that are killed. And so therefore, it's very difficult for you to say in these circumstances there's anything precise about any of this.
Right, so as far as you can see, and we've talked about the so-called ceasefire, as you put it, there is no ceasefire. The killing continues.
Yes, and this is also what we hear from not just our staff, but the communities we work with on the ground. For them, the ceasefire is a ceasefire in all but name. When you have people being killed, when you have people still living in shelters and tents, not able to access the most basic of services, medicine still being blocked at the border, it's very difficult to basically capture this and call this as a ceasefire or a successful type of ceasefire when people are still suffering and there is immense needs and catastrophic needs within the Strip.
One of the conditions of the deal that was done in October was that Israel would allow the volumes of aid entering Gaza to increase. As far as you can tell, has that happened?
Unfortunately, no. As far as we can tell and as far as you can see from the media reporting and figures that come out of the UN, we have not managed to go anywhere close to what we had initially envisioned would come from the ceasefire. We envisioned that Gaza would be flooded with aid. Unfortunately, we don't see that. We're still seeing restrictions on humanitarian organizations and on the UN on all types of kind of services and all types of goods. So no, when it comes to humanitarian goods, we're not seeing the amount of aid that should be entering Gaza, not just to sustain the population there, but to help them recover and rebuild their lives.
And forgive me for nitpicking, but my question was, has there been an increase? I think from the pictures we can see that enough will never be enough. But what was happening before this ceasefire was that the gates effectively into the territory had been closed. Since this deal has done, has there been an increase in the aid going into the territory?
So there was an uptick when the deal was first signed. We saw an uptick for a couple of months, but then I would say around February, we've seen a decline, a steady decline of aid going into the Strip. So it never reached the numbers that were originally promised within the agreement. There was a slight increase, but unfortunately, we've seen that increase decline.
Okay. In March of last year, Israel introduced this requirement for international NGOs like your own, like Save the Children, to provide extensive personal information about the staff working in Gaza in order for these NGOs to continue to operate. Lots of them objected out of concerns for the safety of their staff. How did Save the Children respond to those requirements?
Similar to other humanitarian organizations, we also rejected the requirements that were placed on us.
Right. And therefore, how are you able to work in Gaza? What sort of practical effect is that having on your work?
So practically speaking, we're not able to bring in goods into Gaza and international staff as well into Gaza, but we are able to continue operating and providing financial services and services like wash, sanitation, also providing educational things. So services on the ground we're able to basically provide, and we also work closely with our partners.
And what other risks or dangers are staff on the ground and the partner organisations? What are you facing while continuing this work?
Well, as long as there are airstrikes and as long as there is military aggression inside of Gaza, then we're obviously going to face certain risks. So when it comes to safety, the same risks that civilians in Gaza face, we also face. So I would say that that's another kind of operational consideration. And as Israel controls more than 50% of the Strip, we're also not able to access all of Gaza. So that's another operational consideration. And anywhere behind the yellow line is very dangerous. But we've also seen anywhere near the yellow line, not necessarily at the yellow line, has also resulted in civilians being shot. There have also been reports of aid workers or contractors as well being shot, trying to deliver humanitarian assistance around those areas. So in general, the situation is far from stable.
Right. And again, part of this ceasefire deal that, as you say, is ceasefire in name only, part of that was that there was to be a new administration for Gaza. As far as you can tell, who's actually running the territory at the moment?
Well, as a humanitarian organisation, we don't get involved in these discussions of who is ruling the territory. We basically just try and operate to the best of our ability, working with everyone kind of within the territory to ensure we're able to provide civilians with the aid that they deserve and the aid that they basically require.
OK, so let me rephrase the question. Since the ceasefire happened, has there been a change in who NGOs report to, who NGOs have to get permissions from in order to operate?
We don't get permissions from anyone. We have, and within SAVE, a no contact policy anyways with the de facto authorities. So we've never had to basically report to them. We basically just operate and deliver to the civilians the humanitarian need that they basically require and need.
There was also a promise of reconstruction for Gaza. Again, as far as you can see, has any of that started yet?
That probably is the easiest thing to answer. No, that has not started. And a lot of that is due to the fact that Israeli restrictions heavily restrict the amount of basically not just aid that is able to enter the territory, but the needed material needed for reconstruction. So when we're talking about cement, even, for example, wood planks are restricted. So from the very basics, we're not able to receive that material inside of Gaza. And so that means that reconstruction has not all started.
Right. Thank you so much for talking us through that so clearly. Hiba Alhejazi from Save the Children, thank you.
Thank you so much.